To the untrained eye, this position might look pretty equal. Both players have a queen, both players have 2 rooks, both players have a bishop, both players have 6 pawns. It should be pretty equal, right? Wrong. The reason is because white has a strategically winning position because of some key features. Number 1, this bishop is terrible, and actually black has no good way to get it into the game. You can't come this way, you're stuck. You can't really stay there, you're stuck. You can't come back here. Even if you do, you're still stuck. And going in the corner does nothing. There's nothing that bishop can really do. Compare that to white's bishop. White already has control of a nice diagonal, but you could pretty much move it wherever you want to continue to increase the pressure. On top of that, notice the rook on c5. It is blockading that pawn, so black doesn't even have the option to push it forward to try to unleash this bishop. It's also defended. It's an outpost. There's no pawns that can chase it away. All of these features mean that there's really nothing black can do about that rook on c5. This is an isolated pawn. That's a weakness. It's a target. This is a backward pawn. It's also a target. So you put all these things together, and white has a strategically won position. Welcome to episode 18 in a series where we're going through this book, Logical Chess Move by Move. As a reminder, this is the section of the book where we're looking at queen-pawn openings, which are more positional and strategic in nature, as opposed to some of the king-side attacks, which were more kind of aggressive and tactical. Okay, so let's jump right in. And this was a game played by Noteboom, very strong player. He ended up dying early, which we've seen a few players recently that they had a lot of potential, right? But they ended up dying anyway. He played this game as white, very strong player. So we have a Queen's Gambit, and black decides to play Queen's Gambit declined, which we saw last week as well. Okay, so actually the exact same opening here. White attacks, black defends, and white plays bishop to g5. Now right here we see something very interesting happen. Black plays the move knight b to d7. Now, before I say anything, does anything jump out at you when you see that move? Well, some of you probably said, wait a second, this knight is pinned. We have 2 attackers. Black only really has the 1 defender because the knight's pinned. Can't we just win a pawn, right? That would be a very logical conclusion. And let me show you what happens. Takes, takes, takes. And here black plays a stunning move. This is actually a well-known trap in the Queen's Gambit declined. They're going to take the knight, sacrificing their queen. Why would they do that? Because there is a follow-up move, bishop to b4 check. Our king cannot move. We are forced to block with the queen and now lose our queen as well. Okay, and at the end of the day, black grabs the bishop. They have 3 pieces and we only have 2. We lose a piece in that exchange. Okay, so very tricky trap. This is actually, I used to play this opening early on in my career, and I caught several people with it, okay? Because if you're not paying attention, it's very easy to miss that bishop to b4 check move, all right? So let's go back to the game and see what happened. White actually notices that and instead plays the move e3. Now, e3 doesn't fall for the trap, obviously, because now if you take and you go in that same line, if the bishop comes here, you would have an escape square for your king. So white is threatening to take this at this moment. Now, one thing also that I forgot to mention. When black played the move knight b to d7, why did they not go to c6? You should already know the answer to this if you've been following the series. Why did they not go to c6? Because they block the c-pawn. You do not want to block your c-pawn in queen-pawn openings, usually. Okay, notice white. They played the c-pawn forward first and put the knight behind it. That is totally fine, but black does not want to do that. So that's why they go to d7 so that they don't block the pawn. Okay, so this is usually where the knight goes in these queen pawn openings for black, unless for some reason you already moved your c-pawn forward. All right, so e3 avoids the trap, and black says, okay, now it's time to actually defend because my little trap is no longer going to work. Okay, so c6. And here white plays a move that we really need to talk about. Okay, they play the move a3. Now, a3 is one of those very slow moves. Yes, it has a very clear point. You're stopping the bishop from coming here. You're gaining control of this square. But a lot of beginners play moves like this at the wrong time, and they get into trouble and lose the game. So let me explain the difference to you. If you are playing an e4, e5 opening, which tends to be very aggressive, very tactical. Usually the game happens quickly. There's lots of threats coming in move after move, right? If you're playing a game like that and you pause and just play some slow moves like a3 and h3, you're probably going to get into trouble. Okay, you're probably going to get into trouble because you need to develop as quickly as you can. You need to get your king to safety as quickly as you can, right? And if you're playing moves like this, you're not doing that. However, in a game like this, d4, d5, which is a much slower, a much more positional type of game where threats are not coming in, left and right super quick. Nobody's getting ready to sacrifice a piece to checkmate your king, right? That's not happening. There's not a lot of tension in the position. A little bit here and a little bit here. Other than that, it's a defensive type of setup for both sides. You can afford to play a move like a3. Okay, so it's critical that you understand the difference and why this is actually a good move, but in some other openings, this would be considered a bad move. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Let's keep going. So a3, black plays bishop to e7, breaking the pin. And here white plays queen to c2. This is a great square for the queen. It's good because it controls the c file, which as we've seen from last week is very important in these queen pawn openings, especially the c5 square, which we will talk about. Also, this diagonal is nice, and the e4 square is important as well, okay? White is stopping black's knight from coming in there, or they just simply lose a pawn. Okay, actually, white would trade here first, then take the knight, and then win a pawn. Okay, so queen c2, very good move. Let's keep going. Black castles, gets the king to safety, and white plays knight to f3, very good. And here, black plays the move a6. Now, the question for you guys is, why would black play a6 when they already have the c6 pawn defending that square? What do you guys think? Well, the answer is they're planning ahead to play c5, right? And for example, after something like this, they would probably like to play b5 and then maybe play c5. Okay, this is kind of what black's plan is looking like, and they want this to be defended in that situation. So that's why a6. So what does white do about this plan? This is not an easy move to find. They play, wait for it, rook to d1. Now, a lot of people watching this video are going to look at that and say, wait a second, Nelson, that has nothing to do with b5, right? But remember, the point that what black is probably trying to do is trade here first, then play b5, then play c5. And if that happens, guess what? There's going to be a rook lined up on some of black's pieces, okay, if those trades happen like that. That is what rook d1 does. And we're going to see that as we go through the game. But it's a very, very good move. Just remember that one as we continue to look at this game. So black plays rook to e8. Now, one thing that black is doing is they are waiting. They're waiting to take this pawn until white moves this bishop because they want to force white to move this bishop twice, right, to make them waste some time. If you take it right now, you kind of make white's life easy. They wanted to develop that anyway. They get to recapture. They do it all in one move. It's very nice. So black says, no, I'm going to go here. And I'll wait until you move your bishop, then I'll take that. Okay, so that's a smart thing that black is doing. So now they take it, all right? So they caused white to waste a move there, okay? So let's see what happens here. White captures, and then black does follow through with the plan of b5. White goes bishop to d3, and here black plays the move h6. Now, I have a question for you guys. If they didn't play h6 and instead played the move c5, which is kind of following through with their plan, what could you do here as white? Well, the answer is you just take it. And the problem for black is that if you take with the knight, look at the queen. Look at the queen, look at the rook, and now you see why that was such a good move. Because now you have bishop takes h7 check, and you win the queen, okay? And if black instead says, all right, I'll leave the knight there, let me take with the bishop, you've now walked into a pin, and you still take here on h7, because if the knight takes, you lose your queen this way. So however you look at it, white was going to play bishop takes h7 check here, and black's in trouble. And it all has to do with that rook, which was lined up on the queen. And, going back a few moves, it's like, wait a second, there's so many pieces here. Is that really going to be a threat on the queen? And the answer is yes. I mean, you saw how quickly that could happen, right? So that's why black didn't play c5 and instead played h6, getting that pawn out of the firing line there of the queen and the bishop, okay? Now here white plays an interesting move, which honestly I didn't quite expect this when I was going through the game. They played bishop takes f6. Now, the general rule is don't trade a bishop for a knight without a good reason. And when I was looking at this game, I was like, I don't really see a good reason. Like, why are they doing that? It comes down to they're luring one of these pieces away from the defense of the c5 square. So it's all coming back to the c file and the c5 square. And if you remember the position I showed at the start of the video, right, where white had a rook there, you're starting to get a glimpse into how that has happened by what we're seeing here, okay? Of course, black doesn't want to take this way and open up the king, so they have to move one of the pieces away from the defense of that square. So they decide to take with the knight. All right, let's keep going. Finally, white castles, gets the king out of the center, and black plays bishop to b7, trying to get this bishop into the game. This is one of the problems in the Queen's Gambit decline, is the bishop is stuck back there. And so they're attempting to put it on this diagonal, but we're going to see it doesn't quite work out. So what do you think white played here? And it goes along with the theme of what I mentioned, controlling this square. Well, the move was knight to e4. Now, I think you could also probably consider a move like b4. I don't think that's terrible, but the problem is after a5, now you actually have to start worrying about the tension, and black sort of builds the pressure there. That is why white decided to do it a different way and kind of save that move for later, okay? So they go knight to e4, which stops c5, right? If you play c5 right now, I'm just going to take it. Thank you very much, right? So what does black do on knight to e4? They play knight takes e4. White recaptures. And again, notice you can't play c5, right? So move after move, black is running into this issue of, I really would have liked to play this, but I can't, okay? All right, let's keep going. So here, black plays the move f5, and they're trying to get rid of this bishop, right? Because the bishop is stopping them from playing c5. And if they don't play f5 right away, let's say they just bring their rook over or something, white's going to jump in with knight e5. And now if you try to chase the bishop away, it's just going to go back to f3, and it's just staying there. And this is a bad situation for black. Okay, the bishop is pinned, or the pawn is pinned, you can't move it, the bishop is back there, it's just a bad situation. So that is why black says, no, let me chase that away right away. And of course, you don't want to take this if you're white, because you walk into the pin. Although Stockfish, there's some crazy Stockfish line here, which I'm not going to get into, where it says you could play d5 and be okay, but it's really wild. And generally speaking, this is a bad habit to move pieces into pins like this. So white plays bishop to d3. Okay, let's keep going. Let me see what I wrote down here next. All right, so black plays queen b6, finally getting off of this, file away from that pesky rook and setting up to play c5. Okay, so what does white do? Rook to c1. And basically he mentions here that white must not relax. Okay, you can't relax and allow black to play c5. For example, if you just play some casual move like rook e1 and black is able to do this, they've totally equalized the position. Maybe even they're slightly better now because they have the bishop pair. Okay, you cannot allow that. So it's very critical that white pays attention, which is why rook to c1 is a good move, because now if you go there, white's going to simply take and win the pawn. Okay, so we see this theme, right, of fighting for the c5 square. Black plays rook a to c8, and now finally white plays b4. And notice that they waited. They kind of saved that move because they didn't want to run into problems with a5 and the rook being there and all this stuff happening. So they waited and used other pieces until it was the right moment. Okay, and now they've really locked in that square. This is a backward pawn, and it's even worse because the bishop is there. Okay, let's keep going. Queen to d8. Oh, and by the way, the author actually mentions that even at this early stage in the game, white has kind of strategically already won. Right now, I think that's a little bit premature. You still have some more work to do, in my opinion. But the author says, no, like it's basically over at this point, as long as white doesn't mess it up. Okay, so black plays queen to d8. And the reason they play queen to d8 here is because, for example, if you don't do this and you play with something like a5, just trying to attack, white has a really nice move here. If you would like to pause, what do you think white could play? Well, the move is queen b3. And it's a double threat because you're threatening to simply take the pawn, but you're also pinning the pawn to the king, which means you're threatening to take this pawn. And black has no way to deal with both of those threats. You could play bishop f6 to defend this guy, but then I just take here because it's pinned. Or you could move your king out of the pin, but so that this is defended, but then I take here. And either way, black's position is falling apart. Okay. So what black does, which is actually pretty clever, is play the move queen to d8 so that now if I play queen b3, guess what? Queen to d5 deals with both of those threats that we just talked about at the same time. Okay, both of these are defended now. So that's black's idea. Okay, very nice awareness of what's going on. All right, so what happens now? Let me see, what do I want to say next? Okay, white plays knight to e5, jumping the knight into, this is called an outpost. It's an outpost because no pawns from black can control it. It's also defended here, and so it's a very nice square for the knight to go into. Adds pressure to that weak backward pawn. Okay, so now black says, all right, let's go a5, time to put the pressure on this b4 square. And now white plays queen b3, which is a multi-purpose move. We talked about it earlier attacking here, pinning the pawn, attacking here, and now you're defending here at the same time. Okay? And so black plays the move bishop to d6. Now you might be wondering, Nelson, I thought the whole point of queen d8 was to go queen d5. So why doesn't black just play queen d5? Do you guys see the problem with that now? Well, it's very subtle, but what happened was when a5 was played, you lost a defender to this pawn. Okay, now I'm going to explain why that matters, because now when you take here, if you take this way, look at that. You lose a pawn because this guy's no longer on a6. It's been moved forward. And if you take the other way, you lose this pawn. So now, either way, you're losing a pawn. So queen d5 doesn't have the same effect that it did when you looked at it earlier in the game. Okay, so that's what's going on. That's why black changes plans and instead plays bishop to d6, which is a good move, trying to get rid of that pesky knight for the bishop, which isn't doing a whole lot back there. Okay, so we have bishop takes f5. Remember, that was kind of the point of this pin, right? So following through with the threat. Queen to f6, and it looks for a moment here like black actually might have saved themselves, right? Because they have a fork. It looks like the bishop has to move, and you're going to get your pawn right back, and you're going to be just fine, right? Except no, because you guys kind of know what's happening, right? Bishop to b1. Now, actually, I need to stop here. Why did white go bishop to b1 as opposed to, let's just say, d3 or c2? Why choose this square? Well, for two reasons. Number one, you don't want to block your rook, which is very effective on the c file, so I wouldn't go there and block it, okay? And also, by going all the way back, you allow the queen the option to get in front of the bishop, which is much more powerful, and you can really create some checkmate threats that way. Okay, when the queen is in front of the bishop, that's a battery, but it's more powerful than the other way around that we saw earlier in the game. Right? When the bishop's in the front, yeah, you can still take some stuff and put the king in check. It's not quite the same as when the queen's in front. Okay, so that's kind of the idea behind bishop to b1. So here we go. Black says, all right, let me go ahead and get my pawn back. And now white plays a really nice move, which you probably can recognize from what we talked about, rook to c5. Okay, and this is critical because the major problem for black is that this bishop is out of the game, right? It can't do anything. But if they can ever play c5, even if they sacrifice c5, maybe something happens where the queen comes over and all of a sudden you have checkmate threats and who knows what might happen, right? So white says, nope, I don't think so. I don't even want to mess with that. Let's go rook c5. By the way, this is a free pawn, but now you have double isolated pawns, and you don't stop c5 like we mentioned, and who knows what's going to happen. Okay, Stockfish says you could probably get away with this, but from a human standpoint, rook c5 is absolutely the move that you want to play. Okay, really, really great move. So black tries to get tricky with a4. This is a good moment to kind of think about your tactics a little bit. What should you play here? Well, the answer is queen a2 is what was played in the game, which is a good move. Queen c2 is actually the best move, which we'll talk about in just a second. But let's first talk about what happens if you just ignore the pawn and take the queen, right? Because it's going to be a queen trade. But is this a good version of the position or not? And it turns out this is not as good because, for example, let's say you bring your bishop in trying to do something here. Black's going to simply slide over, get control of the file. And if you try to come here, you can't even take that pawn because you have a back rank mate problem. So all of a sudden, black plays c5. They're busting things open. The bishop's involved. Both rooks are about to be involved. This is actually a really annoying pawn because of the back rank mate threat. And all of a sudden, black's equalized the position. Okay, so you got to be careful, right? Falling for these little traps, basically. So white says, okay, I'm going to go here, keeping the pin on this pawn and keeping the pressure here. Now, queen to c2 is actually the best move. The author talks about it and says something that Stockfish refutes. Now, of course, this book was written many years ago before Stockfish was what it is, so I don't blame the author at all, but let me just explain. The author says queen c2 is not that good because after queen f6, if you go check, the king goes to f7 and you don't really have a follow-up. That's what the author says. Now, from a human standpoint, I look at that position and I think, yeah, I think he's actually right. I mean, what are you going to do? Can't invade here. You can't go here because this is covered. Like, I don't really see anything to do. And black's probably going to come over here and start invading on the d file. And okay, what does Stockfish say? Stockfish says that the plan for white in this position, wait for it, guys, is to throw these pawns forward and attack the king with g5. That is how you win this position as well. And it's actually fascinating. I'm going to show you the line here. f4. Black says, all right, let me invade on the d file. Stockfish says, I don't really care. g4. I mean, normally you got to be really careful, right? But Stockfish is like, no, this is the way to do it. Watch this. Rook comes down, g5. That's literally the plan. f4, g4, g5. Just do that. And the point is that, of course, if black takes, then they walk into a pin. Okay, so they can't do that. They have to move the queen somewhere. So let's say they go, let's say they go to b2 to really threaten some nasty things. Stockfish has a really, really, really good move here. If you would like to pause, what do you think it is? The move is just bishop to e4, just casually defending that square so that you don't get checkmated. That's it. Nice and simple. The bishop's just going to sit there. And even though black can take here, there's no checkmate now because both of these squares are defended. So it looks really scary. But black doesn't really have anything right away. And guess what white's going to do? f5. I mean, it's amazing, right? 1, 2, 3, literally 4 moves out of the last 5 moves were just throwing these pawns forward, and black couldn't do anything about it. And now you're just getting checkmated if you're black. It's over basically. If you take I don't really know what you do. If you take this, there's forced checkmate after queen takes f5. If you don't take it, there's going to be forced checkmate. It's just losing. That's what it is. So all that to say that Stockfish is kind of crazy because in the game the person played queen a2, which from a human standpoint looks like the best move, because if you didn't see all this stuff, you didn't have any way to make progress. Hope that makes sense. Let's keep going with the game. I just thought that was interesting. Wanted to point that out. So black plays queen d6, and this is the moment that I talked about at the start of the video, right? Strategically, white has won the game, even though the material is even. It's just over for black. It's just a question of how do you finish off the game from here, okay? And so the way that it works, queen to c2 now happens. And by the way, there's a significant difference here on if you played queen c2 immediately, the line that I was showing you, notice the queen goes to f6 and it defends on the king side. It's a very good defender. In the game, queen a2, once it goes to d6, that's when he decides, you know what, now I'm going to shift my focus because now the queen is sort of blocked off by the pawn. It's not able to defend the king as well. That's why we're going to set this up. And at the same time, he's adding the pressure here, which is great. Okay, so black plays this, trying to bring the rook over. The queen does now invade. King has to move. You only have 2 options. They're both bad. If you go here, you get skewered. So you don't really want to do that. And so in the game, black played king f8. But if you would like to pause, how do you finish off the game here as white? And the move is bishop to g6 anyway. And basically you're saying, look, depending on what black does, you're threatening to just come in here and take this, and you're going to be winning. And even if you, let's say, try to defend by doing something like this, that's just checkmate right away. There's just nothing black can do. All right, they're just losing position. So all this happened because the black never was able to play the move c5. If you played c5 as black, you were going to be fine, and you're going to have a nice game. But white never let them do it, and ultimately squeezed them into this winning position. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time for game 19 in the book, Logical Chess, Move by Move. I've been really enjoying these games, learning a lot, and I think the feedback has been telling me you guys are learning too. So really excited. I'll see you next time. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.